it's AI plus skills and capabilities.
Why would you want to specialize in one industry?
We need to remind ourselves of the importance of, humanity and human-to-human connections.
Here's what you do.
Well, good morning, everyone, and I'm really excited to introduce you to my next guest here, Tobias Hestler. Tobias and I have known each other for a few years, and he kindly agreed to do this podcast with me. Tobias is a career executive across the life sciences space and has done some amazing work as a CFO across numerous household brands like Sandoz, Novartis, and ending with the famous listing of Haleon as a FTSE 100 company. So, Tobias, wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for your time. Perhaps we can start by just giving us a bit of an introduction about yourself.
Great. No, thanks, James. And it's been a bit more than a few years. We all get a bit older, right? So you make us younger than we
Exactly.
are. But no, look, I've worked with you a long time, which is great. So thanks for having me today. Look, I mean, where I am is probably I'm just at a big inflection point in my career. I decided to step down as CFO of Haleon and end my executive career, and now in a phase of curating a new phase in my life that with the hope and the dream that this keeps me fulfilled and the 30 years of work-life experience I have is useful to people and to companies. So it's an exciting moment, moment for me where I am, and also a bit reflecting on the past, but really curating something that works for me for the future.
Fantastic. And I mean, look, you've had an amazing career, quite a journey, lots of stories to tell. And look, today, I want our audience to get the unfiltered version of Tobias. I want them to get to really know who you are as a person and what shaped you as a leader. And, just to remind the viewers of why we're running this series with this evolving world of technology and AI, which is amazingly productive and moving business forward, we need to remind ourselves of the importance of humanity and human-to-human connections. So let's start there and tell us a little bit about your early years. So where did it all begin?
So, I mean, probably the most important things of my early life is I grew up in a cafe and a restaurant that our parents owned, and we lived upstairs from it. So I was around people and in the business from being a baby. So probably from when I could crawl, I was crawling through the guest room, and then my mom had to half naked or naked. It's one of the stories I was told. But I think that is, an experience that clearly, I would say, shaped my childhood and my teenage years, because I grew up in a business with all the positives and the negative that it brings, and that was in the south of Germany.
Fantastic. And was there any particular moment in your earlier years that you realized you had a knack for numbers, or you liked something around the sort of business world? When did that sort of trigger for you?
I mean, I think, look, there's probably two things that happened. I mean, from growing up in a business, I always understood. I learned how a business operates, right? I mean, it was, clear for me that money doesn't come out of an ATM machine, right? It's how it's earned. It's like, and in these days, the guests paid cash, right? So I still remember, counting the cash from the servers in the evening, and running there when I was a bit older. But sort of an very early childhood memory is that I was actually selling stuff, right? A little bit like a yard sale on the stairs upstairs our apartment where the guests walk through, right? So I think I'm making a little about money of it. Or when I was old enough, I started to help out in the restaurant. And my parents are really great at that, of saying, look, I mean, if you work, we pay you for it, because we pay our people too. So actually I got a pay slip from, I don't know how old I was, but I think from pretty very early on, that my mom actually gave me a payslip and said, here's your payslip, and that's the money you made, and she paid that to me. So the benefit of that was I always had money, but I worked for it, right? And the other benefit was, of course, I was always around people. So I think in terms of, I always connected with people, and probably living up in that environment where there were, guests, employees around, was clearly there, right? And look, The flip side to that is, of course, you have negatives, right? My parents worked Saturdays, Sundays. That's when you made, that were the busy days. They were off
Yeah.
Monday, Tuesdays. That's when I
Yeah.
went to school. So
Yeah.
our family life happened in holidays, which they took very seriously because they were conscious of it, right? So but I think in aggregate, it's probably a big sort of early thing that helped me shape who I am, right?
Yeah. And did they always work in the sort of customer service retail food space, or did any of them work in a sort of corporate setting, or was this something that you did differently?
No, they opened up that business, right? And I think
Right.
my dad was trained as a baker and as a pastry chef. My mom had an office education, but then they really started that business and built it very successfully over 25 years. Yeah.
Okay, so he was the R&D, supply chain innovation and product creation, and your mum was the sort of admin, finance, CFO, CIO.
Correct. My
Yeah.
mom did the service
Yeah.
front of house, and
Yeah.
then the admin in the back office. My
Yeah.
dad sort of was the production machine. But since you mentioned that, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I knew what a P&L was even before I went to university, right? But because my parents, I think they were good at that.
Yeah.
They had monthly accounts. They had a controlling report. My dad meticulously looked at that every month. And actually,
Yeah.
since they were interested and I got interested, so I knew how much money my parents were making. I knew what the cost of goods were in the business. And then later, when I was at university, I got then the theoretical structure around that. But it was very easy for me. It wasn't theory because I could actually relate it back to what's the P&L, of a cake that they were selling, or what's the P&L of, and the cash flow and all that. It was something I could touch and feel because I had grown up in it. Yeah.
So why enter into life sciences and not the food industry? What was the connection there? How did that all come about?
I think it came, so when I was 15, 16, and getting to sort, my A levels in Germany, I was starting to think about what do I want to do afterwards, right? And I think one idea was I do hotel management. So there's very renowned special schools in Switzerland, in Lausanne, probably the biggest one. And I looked at that and I thought that sounds interesting. It's sort of I bring something from what I have at home, but I get the whole. I get a much wider education about it. And then what I did is I took advice. So I sat down with a guy that owned a big hotel in Switzerland where we went always on holiday. And the guy was also the president of the Swiss Hotel Association. And I sat down with him and say, hey, look, I'm thinking about doing that. Do you have time for a coffee? And he sat down with me and I talked to him. I still remember that for about an hour. And one of the things he said to me is, you're 16 or 18 when you do your A levels, or 19. Why would you want to specialize in one industry? So his advice was, think more open. You don't need to make sort of a decision that limits you on one industry. If you want to go back into hospitality or hotels, you can still do that, but think more broadly about your education than limiting it down. And I think that opened up then my eyes to do and study business administration and look for a school. So it was actually speaking to people, and I got a similar advice from someone else that also was in the industry. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if you think about a fork in the road, I mean, you've kind of just answered that in this last question, but could Tobias's life have been very different? Was there a decision where it could have been 25, 30 years in a total different direction? And I'm talking wild here, not necessarily just at work. Could you have been musician? Was there an artist? Was there anything around you as you were growing up that thought, I could be different here? Think about the sliding doors moment type thing.
Yeah, I mean, probably, of course, I mean, there were the childhood dreams of being a pilot, which then got, I think, crashed when I was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic. So you could do that, right? So, but at that time also, I think I went through school, and I think it was clear that I had a skill with numbers and science versus versus other things. So I think that started to build up, right? So I had a skill set, there that was evolving. I think probably one big decision or discussion was, would I take over the restaurant and would I take over the business from my parents? And my parents were, I think, although it was their sort of life project, they were, very rational about it. And I said, because we had a very open discussion. And I think what the conclusion was that they had optimized this to over 25 years, and it was optimally run. There wasn't an obvious thing about make this thing much bigger or something, right? And then I felt it didn't felt exciting for me, where I said, I really want to get into it, and I'm going to take it to another level. And the other one was also, I think, I've seen too many people in the business where the kids took over, but then the parents were still around, and I wanted to be independent, and maybe that's probably another sort of important part of me growing up. So that was probably also around the time when I got to grips myself about being gay. So there was this sort of me realizing I want to be myself, and I needed independence and sort of cut the cords, a little bit from my parents. So which at that time was sort of in my head, and I didn't have my coming out yet. That was a few years later. But I think sort of this desire to be independent and being different and realizing I'm different, and I think finding out and finding my own path in that, I think was starting to probably build up and become a reality at that point. Yeah. And then look, after university, there probably was, a bit then the question about where do I start my career? And then, I did a bit the odd thing about joining the Swiss, life science, or actually an industrial group with 14 divisions, which was Ciba-Geigy at that time, right? Sorry, I interrupted you, James. You wanted to ask something else.
It was just about, you brought a very important point up in your life journey, right? When you realized around your sexuality. And I think I'm interested to hear, like, Switzerland has always, seemed quite a traditional culture. I mean, tell me a bit about, look, you're a type 1 diabetic. You realized that you're a bit different to everyone else at the time. How did you handle that? Let me rephrase. How did other people perceive that? I mean, just tell me what that experience was like for you, because that must have been unique, right?
Yeah. So I think, and look, you also mentioned the type 1 diabetic. Let's just take that one off first, because then we go into the sexual orientation piece. So on the type 1 diabetic piece, I think what that taught me is, one, I have to take care of myself, right? This is not something that I have to treat myself and it's going to be lifelong, right? So I control my own destiny. And in this sense, I control my own health. So that was a building block. The other building block was that when I got diagnosed and then I was in hospital for a while and I wasn't well at school, that really shaped and clarified to me who the close friends are I could trust, because there were people I had a lot of connection with, and I was active in the church and so on. And quite frankly, when it didn't do well, I didn't hear from them, right? But there were people that stuck with me and were supportive through that. So I think it showed to me the importance of relationship and what a real friendship are, rather than the superficial one. So I think that was forming. That was when I was 13, 14 years old or something like that.
Yeah.
The coming out thing then was, yes, it was, I think, first the realization that I'm different. So, okay, tick that. But then it was more the question, how do I deal with my coming out to friends? To friends, I did it when I was around 18, 19, so the final years in school. To my parents, I only did it once I had left and was at university. So that was about 2 years later, right? Because I had
friends before your parents. Interesting.
Yes, exactly, right? So, but that was helpful because it taught me that the friends were supportive and sort of was, we don't care. It's about, you're still the same person that I got to know, that I got to love, that I got to be with. And I think started building the courage to get to this point about, and to this conclusion, ultimately, I am who I am, and that needs no excuses. And ultimately, how my parents deal with it, how business deals with it, doesn't matter, because I'm going to build my own life, right? And I think this whole thing is sort of, probably the theme is independence. It was always important to me that I'm independent, that I'm not dependent on the next paycheck, because I am a bit different, and
Mm.
I want to have the freedom to move and not being tied and locked into something. And then the coming out, I think, was in my experience, Switzerland, Germany, that was actually okay. I think my parents were mostly concerned about what this means for my future, right? It wasn't the sexual thing and me
Yeah.
being with a man. That was sort
Yeah.
of, I mean, probably not okay, but took time to get used to. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it was a deep concern about, will this impact my ability to live a life, to make
Yeah.
my, make money, being accepted,
Yeah.
get to where I want to get to, particularly in
Yeah.
industry, right? I think
Yeah.
that was where I think my dad had his biggest concern about, that
Yeah.
this could be a major roadblock
Yeah.
for me. And that took time for him to realize that
Right.
um, uh, that wasn't the case, right? So, yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, thank you for being so open and sharing that story. And I mean, and as you moved through your career and became more senior, obviously, I assume you're very open about your sexuality from day one when you met people. I mean, do you actually feel that there's parts of going down that path that have given you an advantage? I mean, what would be your message to others that potentially might be going through this?
So, look, I mean, I think for me, um, it was always important to me that my environment around me knew about it and that I
Yeah.
could come to work in the morning and told
Be
people what
yourself.
I did over the weekend and had a partner and whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I think, but what I didn't do in the early years, and in sort of hindsight, bit sort of, should have been much more public about it and sort of, introducing myself. And I think that took another probably 10, 15 years, so probably from my mid 30s on, is
Yeah.
when I was in businesses where if I joined a new business or a new division, that I actually stood up and say, that's me, that's my partner, and use pictures and
Right.
so on, right? So there's
Yeah.
one where I think that took a bit more time for me to sort of, be more comfortable with,
Yeah.
being super open about it. Although all the people who worked for me, the people I worked for, they all knew that, and that was all cool. But
Yeah.
me being more open about it is something that needed a bit more. And look, the feedback, what I've what I've seen, and look, I did this in a very positive environment, right? It was Ciba-Geigy, it was Novartis, it was
Yeah.
very, it was a global headquarter,
Yeah.
it was very world
Yeah.
open,
Yeah.
diversity was very early
Yeah.
and appreciated. So I think it was an easy environment,
Yeah.
easy in quotation marks, to do that. But I got a lot of positive feedback from people that actually, showing sort of with just making that a normality, that people realize you can be who you are, right? And it doesn't have to be the sexual orientation, but it can be
Yeah.
anything else, right? About how you grew up, what,
Yeah.
how you look, how you behave. I mean, that was a
Yeah.
bit the
Yeah. I
message,
think
right? Yeah.
the sexual orientation piece isn't what matters here. What matters is the fact that you were prepared to be vulnerable and show some humility. And, this is the thing that I'm seeing more and more now in modern leadership, especially in the US. I see it more than others. It's like there's this fear to be vulnerable in front of, your team. I mean, tell me a bit about how, firstly, as CFO, when you're leading the entire organization top down, I mean, how do you think that humanity, the vulnerability piece, and how did that really impact and shape success or failure in the jobs that you held?
Yeah. So, um, we approach it from a few different angles. So I think one one angle probably is this. Uh, One angle is sort of the humility piece, right? Which I think is broader than showing who you are, right? It's also about being very open about what I'm a leader, what am I good at and what am I not good at, right? And the problem is that in the way we grow up, how we go through school and so on, we're sort of, and the early years and the career sort of shaped of, showing, being, trying to be perfect and showing off perfect. And I think
Yeah.
in the world today, even more so, right? Because everything looks brilliant on Instagram and on
Totally.
social media, right? So
Yeah.
I think
That's true. Yeah.
there is I think we're in a phase where actually, it becomes all a bit, marketing, poster child stuff. And that doesn't create connection, right? And it doesn't create connection with people. So one thing I learned early on is the way I'm wired, and a lot goes back to personality profiles, is I'm just going to be brilliant at certain things, and I'm really bad at others. And I think when I started talking about and opening up on that, that created so much improvement in the way how the teams work together. And I did that with smaller teams and then with bigger teams, right? So the way I'm wired is, I'm really good at visioning. I'm really good at building connections. I have a very high standard to go after, but I'm not so good in the detailed logistics of the job, right? So, but then I had people around me, but I needed to create the space for them and say, this is your job. And let me you do that. I need you to help with that, but I needed to create the environment. And I think once I learned to say that very openly in front of first my team, but then ultimately in front of, the 1,500, 2,000 people that worked for me, I think that opened up and I think created a lot of opportunities and started to help great people and connect with me. Where it also helped is that as a CFO or as a senior finance leader, very often, not your direct team, but then 2-3 levels down, people only get to see you in moments. They come for 15 minutes and ask for approval of something. They dial into a meeting, want a capital approval, whatever it is. So, and in that moment, they see that tiny sliver of me, which is at that moment is asking a simple question, does this make financial sense, and so on. So people only see this, for them, the CFO is what they experience in these 15 minutes, right? And I think that's where I think it makes a huge difference by if you're able to connect and actually talk more about you, because then they start seeing not the full you, but a bit more of you than sort of these moments when they tend to interact.
And is that something you really focused on? Because a really interesting point, as you say, time is perhaps your most precious commodity in many ways. And I think, you get more exposure to your CEO and the rest of the executive team, and as you said, your direct reports. But if you're the, let's say, financial controller for a cluster region who's got an important job, and they're not necessarily idolizing you, but getting time with you is big for them in their career. It's a moment to show an impact as well. How did you use 15 minutes or 10 minutes or 5 minutes by a coffee? How did you manage to use that time to create that space that was something that they felt was valued? Because that's a really interesting skill, right?
So I think probably two things. Of course, one is being with people, right? And I think making sure, and probably I overdone the traveling, right? Will cost as well over time. But I think being with people creates these moments where you can have a breakfast and a coffee in the morning. You ask someone, meet me at the hotel, walk to the office with me. You have 10, 15 minutes of a discussion. You're at the coffee table. You organize and build into the, because usually when you go somewhere, they build your full schedule, but say, no, one time in between. And I want to connect with people, and I want these Q&A sessions and not me talking, but people. So that's what I've always built. The other thing I ran is from very early on, I did mentoring programs where we had people 2-3 levels down that were at different stages in their career. And I took them away for a day or two, right? It doesn't mean I was there full time, but then at least I had these moments with them. So that, and the reason that was also important to me was that given how I grew up, right? I grew up in an environment of negative reinforcement. I never heard well done for trying, right? And in a Germanic environment too. I'm very direct, I'm very straight, and that sometimes can scare off people, right? So, and that's a little bit that people only saw that little part of me, right? So in the moment, but also maybe behavior-wise, something that they suddenly thought that's the guy. And
I've seen that side of you when you're a client of me, but I thought Tobias isn't happy here.
Exactly, right? But and that was never a problem with my direct reports because they got to know me and we had enough connections. But 2-3 levels down, that's really important. And what I did is by having over time, taking 30, 40 people, the next level down, through over 2 or 3 year period, through that program, they all got to know me. And that helped tremendously because when somebody then said, oh, Tobias will never agree with that, and he's really difficult or whatever, or he's super direct. Then I had 40 people that got to know me and say, no, you've just seen that sliver of him. Here's what you do. You should talk to him. Or that doesn't sound like Tobias. Let's call him. So I think, and that helped me. It had a multiplier effect in the organization that I could not have achieved myself, knowing sort of where my, my more extreme behaviors are that I have, right?
Yeah, no, I love that. That's a really good example. I mean, so the other thing I want to focus on is we'll stick to the CFO thing at the moment. So technology is insane at the moment, right? I mean, you look at what was shared services to GBS, to AI agents, to everything. I mean, think how much of your finance, IT, etc. organizations are run specifically by productivity tools now, AI. Think of all the instant messaging chats we have, all the different tools to be around productivity. How did you find, obviously, the early career as a finance leader versus perhaps at the end when you were with Haleon? The transformation and innovation must have been so intense, and you kind of have to retrain how you're running an organization. I mean, how did you find that balance of, going with the technology to help you be more productive and give you back more time, but at the same time, make sure you didn't lose that connection with people? Because that's the big thing that I'm seeing here now, is that how do you get that balance right?
Yeah. I mean, I think probably two things. So one is, I think we have a big challenge on how we educate people along the way to start developing the right smell of things, right? So I think it's sort of this, you see a set of numbers and it just doesn't feel right, right? And I think, and very often you have these situations of, you see something and something's wrong, and then you can go dig, right? And I think and you can't do that with technology, right? And I think that stuff you pick up because you're with people, you're working on issues and topics together. And it can be via a computer screen as well. But I think it's all this stuff is in the, I would call the decision support, the strategic support of the business, right? And clearly from when I started, finance was still, accounting, reporting numbers, and so on, right? And I think all this other stuff was built over time. It's also stuff that I enjoyed doing, and I focused more on. So I probably from earlier on did stuff that said, we need to get the machine running, and the machine needs to operate well, because where I want to spend my time, and where I want my team to spend time, is being the sparring partner to the business and freeing up and seeing technology as a way of freeing up time and doing that. And I think that is more important than ever. And I think now with the tools you have, you save a lot of time from that you spend with researching stuff or pulling data together. But then I think you still need to learn, does this sound right? Right. And I think it's the same with, you use ChatGPT, right? And then if you don't start pushing back and say, is this really true? Validate that. Sometimes you go 15 cycles, and if after the 15th you realize the first answer wasn't true at all, right? Or actually you've given up because it couldn't do it, right? And I think learning that sort of to say, this doesn't feel right, that you say, when do I push back, I think is important.
And what about the future of work? Because this is a big topic as well. If you think about all of the entry level, let's say 5 to 7 years experience type roles in a global organization, what would your advice be to CHROs, current executive leaders, around how they foster, progression and how they find that balance between AI and jobs?
Look, I think there's technical skills to learn, right? And I think some of that learning, tools help you, or actually you don't need to do the technical thing because actually a tool is doing that now. Brilliant, right? But it's a little bit of stuff you can learn. In the old days, I say, read a book, go to a course, right? You can learn that, right? But then there's the whole set of things that you can't learn from a book, right? And you can't learn it through a tool. And that's the stuff where it's business support and it's leadership, right? Then you have to experience. So you have to look for these diverse opportunities, right? Right. In my early years, they gave me a chance and say, you're going to be a sales rep for a year, right? Now, at a job I want to do for life? Absolutely not. But I learned the business from the ground up. And I think this the 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 seeking out those diverse experiences that, you know, aren't, and that's important, right? And then ideally in an environment where you know you can learn from others around you, right? And look, it doesn't all have to be in an office setting Monday to Friday, but
yeah,
I learned a lot from observing and being on the journey with someone,
yeah,
and I think you can do that, you know, in an open office environment, or you have to put extra effort that it
yeah.
happens on screen, that you have the right people and you pull the juniors along to learn along the way, which I think is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think, I mean, but putting you to the sword on this, you're a CFO. If I said to you, there's a technology solution here that could reduce your workforce by 1,000 jobs, create a 3% increase in your EBIT margin, how do you manage that decision? Because obviously the facts are there and it could work, but what I think leaders aren't thinking about is what is the fallout around the company's culture? What does it do for future leaders? Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah, look, look, if this takes it out of the process
Yeah,
and improves the machine, right? So
yeah,
improves the machine from, you know, an I don't know, an old watchtower clock from 1500
yeah,
to that you had to pull up
yeah,
to a very modern tool that all does it automatically. Perfect, right? But you still then need the support structure around it to build that system, right? Because, I mean, if you compare, there needs to be a skill set to maintain a clock from 1500. It needs a different skill set to maintain an an Apple Watch, right? So I
yeah,
think, but you have to make sure that you build the skills and the capability to manage and build and maintain that new
yeah,
technology. I think that's
yeah,
what we sometimes forget. So I would absolutely go for it if it, you know, takes time out of processing invoices,
yeah,
reporting,
yeah.
pre-filling stuff, getting you pre-filled things. But then
That's the machine. That's the
you
machine you're
have to
talking about.
reinvest some of that into people spending quality time on it. And then secondly, I think you have to create learning roles in your organization. And
Yeah,
I think that we tend to forget as well. There are roles that
yeah,
are really great and are
yeah,
critical for you as a leader learning to be,
yeah,
I don't know, a leader of leaders and so on, right? And I think designating those roles and making sure you use them
yeah.
to build your future leadership is critical, right? Yeah.
But that's a really key point. I just want to lean into a bit more. So you said create learning roles.
Yeah.
That's unique because that gives you runway, right? And I think this is the point, is that a lot of entry level roles, people, like in my world or in professional services, you're an associate, you know, in banking, you're an analyst, you know, you're a researcher. And these are the roles that people fear AI is just going to completely wipe out. But, you know, the reality is that for me, yes, gathering the data is one thing, but then how do you communicate that data to make it make sense? And that's the point. So, I mean, so on the learning roles perspective, is what you're saying, it's AI plus skills and capabilities as a holistic solution, right?
But I would just say it's probably the job content changes, right? So if you think about an entry level analyst, you start
Yeah,
working for an investment bank. I did that. I did that for 4 or 5 months when I was at university, right? So I worked at an investment bank. What I did there, probably 80% of that was, you know, going to a library and
yeah,
finding data
yeah,
and so on, right? Which you don't have to do anymore. But
yeah,
there was probably then 20% of putting that together into a
yeah,
coherent story, testing it with the leaders I had in the bank,
yeah,
taking feedback, learning from that, and then
yeah,
creating an output that ultimately worked for what they
yeah.
wanted to do.
Okay.
This job today is the 80% probably become 10 or 20%, but you need a
Yeah.
new skill to say, where do I get it from and how do I validate it, right?
Validated. Yeah.
Because now the sources might not be the trusted sources that we had in the past, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one, but then how do you then educate and say, do the value adding piece on that and make that a bit bigger. So I think it changes, but it's not going to go away. It just, I think you might need less of them, but it's a different focus on them. And by the way, the work also might be more interesting than going through pages and, and finding stuff to do. And that's, I think, the difficult for us is, and also for me as a leader, was always very difficult because the way I grew up and what I learned, what you need to learn today is different, right? And how do we all evolve our thinking that we need new skills, and how do we bring new skills in that that we didn't need to use or I didn't need to use when I grew up and as a leader. Yeah.
And you also said, I mean, some people grow up and said, I want to be a finance guy, I want to be in supply chain or an engineer. But actually you said something else which is quite interesting, is that you went in and maybe did a year in sales, and actually that's not a bad idea as an entry point into a company, because sometimes it's just getting in through the gates, isn't it? So I think one thing I would say to young people is be a bit more flexible, just like you were at the start with the hotel industry, keeping your horizons a bit broader, to think, look, you know where you want to end up, but it doesn't mean you have to start there, right? And I think that's something I think we're gonna see more of to get into jobs, right? Is that you got to follow where the wind takes you.
I think so. But also, look, I mean, from your early 20s to when you're 30, that's the time you figure out, and it's easy. And that during that time, test it. You like it, you keep at it. If you don't like it, you draw a line out of it and you make a change, right?
So Instagram, all this perfect life, tech billionaire by 26. People think they're failing now if they're not, a millionaire by 30. And I think it's compared to days before where that experimentation phase where people it's people scared now.
No, I know. And look, and there's nothing lost on that, right? Because I mean, it's, when you look at a whole life, but it's, and look, sometimes you're lucky that you very quickly get into where you are. That was my case, right? I ended up in finance very, a few years into starting work. And there's others that, you fly a few more cycles. So nothing bad about that, right? I think, and by the way, you can draw on those learnings from those cycles. Actually, they make you a better, in my case, a better finance guy. It helped me that I worked in sales. It gave me.
Well, you remember the old CFO was your accountant, IFRS, US GAAP expert, and all of a sudden it was the out-and-out business partner, right? I mean, I've seen that shift doing it, and you've always prided yourself on that human-centric, talking the language of business, commercial part, and I think that's safe to say you enjoy that part the most, right? If you were just crunching numbers whilst you, let's say geek out on it a little bit, it's not what you wanted to do, right?
No, all right. Yes, exactly right. Yeah. But that's also this, I think, starting to learn and putting the mirror in front of you, or having other people putting the mirror in front of you, what you're really good at, and then testing in an interview setting, is this job actually what I'm going to enjoy, right? So that you don't because I think we sometimes forget interviews should be a two-way street of as much you interviewing the company if this is for you. And of course, the title sounds nice and the money and whatever, but if you then end up in a job that 80% of it is what you have to put massive amounts of energy in because you're bad at it, then this isn't for you. And I think building up that courage of saying, or actually building up the data points of, and that takes time, right? That takes about 10 years plus to figure out, I'm good at that, I'm not so good at that. And then using it, right? And that's hard to do, very difficult, right? Because you're sort of, job sounds great, I really want that. And then you only realize it when you're in it, right?
Yeah, that's true. And look, conscious of time, just to sort of wrap up with a few last questions. Talk to me a bit about the latest move with the Elton John AIDS Foundation. I mean, what was the thinking behind that? How did it come about? What was the sort of passion project around it?
So look, how did it come about? I got a phone call. Somebody said they're searching that. And then said, if you're interested, I introduced you to the headhunter. So it came through, a professional search firm, but somebody that knew about me and said, hey, I connect you. I got a call. That's not for me. So combination of, there was a search process, but also knowing people and knowing people where you are in your career, right? It's the combination, right? Very often in life that is. So, and then it connected with me for pretty much two reasons. One is I came out at a time when HIV was there, but I've seen friends go through struggle, the stigma of it, the difficulty of, the early years. It wasn't clear whether medication would actually give you another year of life or 15 years of life. And then I think it very much also, so personal, deep, I've been through those years. Then secondly, I've spent my life in an industry of helping and supporting people. And quite frankly, as a type 1 diabetic, I would not be alive without with somebody having invented insulin and medical device firms having invented stuff along the way. So I think deeply care about that personally, but also what I've done professionally. And so that was the gut that connected very positively to it. And then as I went into the discussion with the headhunter, with the foundation, with the board, ultimately with David Furnish, who's the chair of the board, who's Elton's husband. I did the due diligence then of this is also works for me, and what they want from me I can do, right? But I think it was here first and then do the rational thing. And look, it's exciting, it's an important time. So and look, I'm great. It's something new to learn. I've never done something in the not-for-profit space. So, but there's a lot of things that I bring from my experience and from my own belief set that match here, right?
No, it's fantastic. I mean, you must be super happy with it, and I can imagine how much passion it is. And it's just this different phase, because one thing you said to me when we last caught up was, you realised as a type 1 diabetic, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it does slightly shorten your life expectancy versus somebody normal. And you said, like, I need to know that now at my age where I am, you're not old, but you've got time. But you know what I mean? Just talk to me a bit about that, because I remember you saying that to me.
Yeah, look, I mean, there is, as every pharmaceutical study on any type of, illness or disease is hundreds or thousands of people in it, right? And what all these studies say, the average lifespan across the thousands of people in the study is 7 years shorter, right? Now, of course, it's an average. So there's people that live 10, 15 years longer. They live. So what I hope, I'm on that end of the scales and not on that. But if I to say, look, I follow the average, there's 7 years less, right? So, and just being cool with that, and that's just a fact. And then I think, then the question was, what else can I do that I don't add another risk factor to my life, right? Because then, got older, got the usual 50 plus stuff, so a bit higher blood pressure, nothing deeply serious, but then there's just another risk factor on another one. And then saying, why do I do that, right? Do I really add another risk factor? And I had a very successful life career. I didn't have to work didn't have to continue the job I've done for another 3 or 4 years. So I said, it's time now, and let me do that. And then now I think I still want to do something. I'm not going to, do nothing, but taking a risk factor out was important to me. And by the way, 7 months in, it's proving to be there, right? So I've, I'm off blood pressure medication now, right? So I think, which sort of, my gut told me that might be the case, but I got the proof point now, right? So,
Are you feeling, and are you feeling genuinely different in your body and your health now you've not got the day to day?
No, look, I've always had energy, right? So, but I think, of course, what is actually a new experience is that there isn't this drumbeat that, I had done 27 years of finance. I had P&L responsibility pretty much from day one when I was in finance. So I've been in a monthly, quarterly outlook finance drumbeat. Not even speaking of all the stuff we did with transformation and so on. But I think not having that drumbeat is actually a new experience, and I enjoy that, and I'm not missing it. But I've done it, right? I've done it in my career. But this is ticked, and draw a line under it. And I think that creates, takes. It's probably not pressure, but it's a bit of, it's something new to learn and live in, and I enjoy that, right? So
Fantastic. And look, I'm going to finish up by giving you 3 quick fire questions, okay? We call it the lightning round. So, number 1, leadership in one word.
Authenticity.
Very good. I like it. A quote that guides you?
I am what I am, and what I am needs no excuses. I'm
I
not
love
going to
it.
sing it to you, but
Yeah, no, you tried to then. You nearly did, yeah. And then there's a billboard outside of every boardroom. What does that billboard say?
you want to say a billboard that sort of says what you should be doing in the boardroom,
Yeah,
or
so there's a sign, and it's, let's say it's a guide for every board member that walks in. Like, what's it sort of reminding them to do when they're in there discussing everything?
I would say be honest.
Yeah, very good. I like that. Well, look, Tobias, thank you so much for your time. As always, pleasure to talk to you. And honestly, thank you for being so open and telling your story. I think it's going to be very well received by lots of people. And once again, thanks, and we'll see each other soon. Okay?
Wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.